Hey, it's Monday, January 7th. This is the Debrief. Thanks for watching us. I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington. A lot of big news today. Kevin Spacey just concluding an appearance in a Massachusetts court. The government shutdown here in Washington now dragging into a third week. And we have the latest in tech trends out in Las Vegas at the Consumer Electronics Show. All of that coming ahead. But first, the headlines.
Former ambassador to the U.S. and Israeli Defense Minister Moshe Aarons has died. He was 93. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who Aarons hired, says there was no greater patriot. Aarons grew up in the U.S. and fought in World War II. A weekend arrest in the death of a little girl outside of Houston.
Eric Black is said to have confessed to his role as the getaway driver in the shooting that killed 7-year-old Jazmine Barnes, a crime that captivated the nation. He told police the shooting was a mistake, that the Barnes family was not the intended target. On Tuesday, the funeral is to be held for Jazmine.
A historic change of leadership for our colleagues over at CBS News. Award-winning producer Susan Zirinsky has been named the first woman to lead that network's news division.
New concerns this morning about the sharp decline in the number of monarch butterflies. An environmental group says it counted only 30,000 monarchs in this survey on the West Coast. Get this, that's a decline of 86% in just 1 year. Scientists say the butterflies are threatened by pesticides, pollution, and climate change. They're normally seen this time of year in forests all along California's coast.
And we start today out in Nantucket, Massachusetts. That's where actor Kevin Spacey of House of Cards fame and other big films, of course, was just in court to answer accusations from 2016 that he groped a young man in a bar there. It has turned the island into a media frenzy. That's where our Lindsay Davis is. She's just outside the courthouse there. Lindsay, this all just went down. The judge seen Kevin Spacey in court. Tell us what happened.
Yeah, well, just want to set the scene for you, Devin, outside of the courthouse. You know, for those who haven't been to Nantucket before, it's a very charming, small island, and normally during the off-season, it's very quiet. But today, certainly things are abuzz with lots of media clamoring outside of this courthouse right behind me. The scene just a few moments ago, and Kevin Spacey walked into a side door of the courthouse. Of course, he was hounded by photographers and reporters asking lots of questions. He did not say a word. He was in and out of court within just a matter of minutes. Did enter, as we expected, that plea of not guilty, and the two-time Oscar winner will add that he's charged with felony indecent assault and battery for allegedly groping a then 18-year-old at a bar here in Nantucket in 2016. Now, former Boston News anchor Heather Unruh says that it's her son who Spacey assaulted, describing him as a starstruck, straight 18-year-old young man who admits telling Spacey that he was 23, even though he was 18 at the time. Now, while Spacey was hardly seen publicly since multiple allegations have been made against him, on Christmas Eve, the very same day that he was charged, Spacey posted this video on Twitter channeling his Netflix character in House of Cards, Frank Underwood.
I know what you want. You want me back. Of course, some believed everything and have just been waiting with bated breath to hear me confess it all. They're just dying to have me declare that everything said is true and that I got what I deserved. Wouldn't that be easy if it was all so simple? Only you and I both know it's never that simple, not in politics and not in life. But you wouldn't believe the worst without evidence, would you? You wouldn't rush to judgments without facts, would you? Did you?
I want to play a statement, or actually read a statement to you from the attorney for the victim, who, when we asked him for comment today, he said that by reporting the sexual assault, my client is determined and encouraging voice for those victims not yet ready to report being sexually assaulted. My client is leading by example. I have no further comment because of the pending criminal case. So we did hear inside the court that Spacey's case will continue in March, though he does not have to make an appearance if he is convicted, if there is a trial and he is found guilty, he could face up to 5 years in prison. Now, according to the criminal complaint, the victim says that he actually has Snapchat video that he sent to his girlfriend of the alleged assault. Investigators now have that video. However, Kevin Spacey's attorney says that, look, this video doesn't show anyone being groped at all. Devin.
And Lindsay, before we let you go, this just to reiterate that Spacey did not enter a plea today in court there, but this case sort of came out of that big wave of Me Too moments in the past year, people coming forward accusing Hollywood stars, power players of misbehavior. Why has this case gotten so much attention, and how is it different from some of those other cases that we've been reading about?
I think that it's similar to a lot of them in a number of ways, in that, there have been the statute of limitations has passed on a number of the accusers who've come forward. And so Kevin Spacey, it's reported that he has about 30 people who've come forward with these kinds of varying allegations, ranging from sexual harassment to sexual assault. But this is one of those cases, because it happened in 2016 with an 18-year-old, where there is still time that if the court wanted to act, they could go forward with charges. And what we've seen in a number of the other cases, to answer your original question and how it's different in a number of the other cases, you're past the statute of limitations, and so there isn't an opportunity to kind of, if the allegations are true, have the accused kind of pay a price here. But we'll still see. This is obviously all to be continued in March, and we'll see if there is, a trial or enough evidence, information to go forward against Kevin Spacey.
All right, Lindsay Davis for us in Nantucket. Thanks so much, Lindsay. We know you'll stay on the case. Much more on that story at abcnews.com. Meanwhile, here in Washington, we're now in day 17 of the partial federal government shutdown. This puts this shutdown on record for the third longest in American history. It doesn't look like it's going to let up anytime soon. Let's go to the White House now, where Karen Travers has been tracking it. She was at the White House all weekend. Karen, they tried to have negotiations this weekend, but it doesn't appear there was any progress.
No movement over the weekend, Devin, and these are really more discussions than negotiations, because if you look at who was in the room over the weekend, it was Vice President Pence, it was the Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen, and Jared Kushner. But Devin, they were meeting with congressional aides. They were not sitting down with lawmakers. So it was pretty hard to see how that group was going to produce a breakthrough that would result in a big announcement that the shutdown was going to end. President Trump yesterday seemed to undermine those efforts over the weekend of his own vice president, when he said that if he and Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi sat down, they could solve this in 20 minutes if the Democrats wanted to. And ultimately, Devin, that is what everybody thinks is going to happen. This is not about staff discussions. It's not even the top lawmakers from both parties. This is President Trump and the Democrats right now, and neither side is budging.
Yeah, and there's no meeting scheduled today either, Karen, but the president is still talking about the possibility of declaring a national emergency, something he says he can do on his own. What's the latest on that, and what's your sense on whether that's even legal?
The president yesterday said he is considering declaring a national emergency, and what that would do, according to the administration, is allow them to take money that has already been approved for the Pentagon and put it toward building the wall, averting Congress there. A couple things here. One, a lot of questions about whether they can even do that. You can't legally take money appropriated for issue A and put it to issue B. But the White House says that by declaring a national emergency, the president would have the authority to do that. Devin, legal experts say even declaring a national emergency may not make that possible. If the president goes down this path, he will almost certainly face a legal challenge, and this would be then tied up in court. One thing the president said yesterday, though, Devin, that was interesting. He said he's still thinking about that, and he'll make a decision on whether to declare a national emergency based on what happens in the coming days. That certainly seems to be a public acknowledgement that the president is waiting to see what happens in the shutdown negotiations before deciding on that. It's either a crisis at the border that requires a national emergency, or it isn't. The president certainly seems to say this is his, final card he could play, if you will, if negotiations do not go well.
And of course, Karen, it's starting to feel like a crisis for a heck of a lot of people out in the country, not just the hundreds of thousands of federal workers, but also people who receive government financing for their homes, food stamps, people waiting on those tax refunds. What have you been hearing? You've been talking to a lot of radio stations around the country. What are they hearing? What are you hearing from people out there about the impact this is having?
Yeah, that this is not an abstract thing. I think when people hear government employees, they automatically think of Washington because of the federal agencies that are, of course, headquartered here. 800 federal employees right now, though, are impacted by this partial shutdown, half working without pay, the other half off the job. But they're not all here. They're across the country. They're in small towns in Utah, West Virginia, Alabama, and that's having a trickle effect into those communities. Imagine if people aren't going to work in their big office building, they're not going to lunch, they're not getting sandwiches, they're not buying coffee at the local shop down the street. And Devin, I talked to more than a half dozen radio stations today across the country, ABC radio stations, and there was a lot of frustration and questions about something the president said yesterday. He was asked by reporters if he can relate to the federal employees impacted by this shutdown. Here's what he had to say.
I can relate, and I'm sure that the people that are on the receiving end will make adjustment. They always do, and they'll make adjustment. People understand exactly what's going on. But many of those people that won't be receiving a paycheck, many of those people agree 100% with what I'm doing.
And Devin, that's something we've heard from the president a lot in the last couple of days. And he says that people back him on this. And he tweeted last week that he doesn't care if most of the people impacted by the shutdown are Democrats. He still wants to end this. But he has insisted that these federal employees are behind him. They support his push for border security. I got to say, we're not sure who he's talking to or in what context he's having this outreach with federal employees. But people that have certainly gotten in touch with ABC News say they're very concerned. They want to get back on the job. They're worried about their paychecks, and they don't want to be a pawn in this political fight here in Washington.
Hey, Karen, thanks so much for your reporting at the White House. Now you'll stay on it all day. And speaking of those stories, we want to hear them. If you've been affected personally in some way by this shutdown, go to abcnews.com/politics. Look on the right-hand column there, Shutdown Stories. You can give us yours. Tell us how you've been impacted. Perhaps it's by a longer TSA line at the airport. We're hearing reports of longer lines because those workers are calling in sick. Let us know. Would love to hear your story and get in touch with you. All right, moving on now. Some breaking news out of the Supreme Court this morning, where I was a little bit earlier today. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the senior justice of the court, 85 years old, who had cancer surgery last month, did not join the court for today's oral arguments. It's the first time Ginsburg has not sat on the bench for a public session in her 25-year career. Now, court officials say she'll continue to participate in some of the court cases through reading the briefs, reading the transcripts of the arguments. But today at the Supreme Court, Ruth Bader Ginsburg not there, and it's not clear if she'll be back later this week. All right, overseas now to London, where our Ian panel is tracking the story of two alleged Americans arrested in Syria trying to fight with ISIS. An interesting story, Ian, over the weekend amidst all this news that the president is declaring ISIS defeated. And here now the Syrian militia is reporting they have two Americans in custody. What do we know about these two guys?
Yeah, that's right, Devin. I mean, let's not forget, first of all, let's remind people that back in December, the president tweeted that ISIS had been defeated, then went on to release this video statement from the Rose Garden, essentially saying that the troops were going to be withdrawn, the victory had been declared against ISIS. Well, what we know from on the ground is that actually that fight has been going on before, during and after those statements were made. Over the weekend, what we heard from the SDF, this is the Syrian Democratic Forces, these are the local partner forces that the US have been fighting with, is that they arrested 5 men that they say all are foreigners, 2 of whom they claim are American. Let's have a look. These are the men being held. Both claim to be US citizens. The first is said to be Warren Christopher Clark from Texas. The other man, also claimed to be a US citizen, is Saeed Abed al-Hamid. Now, the Pentagon is not confirming these claims, simply stating it's aware of these reports and that the matter is under investigation. The men, as you say, were captured as part of an ongoing battle against ISIS in Syria. We've got some biographical details. We think of Clark, who's alleged to be American and a member of ISIS. Apparently, he's originally from Houston and was a former substitute teacher in Sugar Land, Texas. It's claimed he later taught English in Saudi Arabia and Turkey, then applied to continue teaching for ISIS. ABC News obtaining a copy of what is claimed to be his resume and his letter of application to ISIS to work as a teacher. It suggests he could have joined the Islamic State back in 2015.
Gosh, Ian, a letter of application to ISIS from an American from Texas certainly shows that group is not gone completely just yet. Ian Panel, thanks for your terrific reporting on Syria throughout. Much more on abcnews.com. To Texas now, where that story of a tragic story of a 7-year-old killed by gunfire over the weekend. Some new developments now on the murder of 7-year-old Jazmine Barnes. Our Marcus Moore is in Houston with the latest. Hey, Marcus.
Well, Devin, good morning. This is certainly a tragic case, the 7-year-old girl losing her life in what police are now describing as a tragic case of mistaken identity. And we've been learning new details about the investigation that really took a turn over the weekend on Saturday. That is when police investigators received a critical tip. This tip originally came from the famed civil rights activist and journalist Shaun King. He received it first and then personally gave it over to Sheriff Ed Gonzalez, who says that once police were able to corroborate that critical tip, things really started to fall into place very quickly this weekend. And so instead of focusing on that possible white male suspect who was seen in a red pickup truck in the moments after the shooting on December 30th, police were now looking for as many as 2 suspects, including a 20-year-old man who was arrested over the weekend. His name is Eric Black Jr., and he is charged with capital murder in this case. And according to prosecutors, he admitted to his role in this shooting. And there's indication from a law enforcement source telling police that the suspects in this case they shot at a car they believe belonged to someone else. It turns out that this car that Jazmine Barnes and her mother were in was not the right vehicle, if you will, and instead Jazmine and her family were innocent victims in all of this. So this was a major shift in this investigation that early on the family thought might have been a hate crime. Well, now we know that the suspect who's been charged with murder is not a white male, and there's another man who is in custody right now on a drug charge. He is also a person of interest in Jazmine's murder. He is a black male as well. So certainly this new development came as a big surprise to a lot of people, and including law enforcement, who up until Saturday were still focused on that red pickup truck. If it had not been for this tip, they might still be chasing that angle. And the sheriff did point out that they received more than 1,000 tips in this case, and that it's entirely possible that Jazmine's mother just saw that red truck and that white male in the midst of the chaos, in the fog of it, if you will. And that is the information she handed over to police, the information she had at the time. So this, Devin, is a very complicated case in some way, but certainly very tragic as well. And while there has been an arrest, it will not bring back little Jazmine, and certainly this family still dealing with that and only now beginning to grieve. And she's expected to be laid to rest on Tuesday. Devin.
All right, our thanks to Marcus Moore for that. And that funeral happening tomorrow, paid for in part by NBA great Shaquille O'Neal and a local Houston police officer who cut a check for that. Quite a touching remembrance of Jazmine Barnes. Moving now to a lighter subject out in Las Vegas. That's where the Consumer Electronics Show is taking place. Oh, they have all the coolest gadgets in tech right now. That's where our Romina Puja is. And Romina, it looks like you're right outside the convention hall there. What are people buzzing about this year? What's the hottest item on the list?
Hey, Devin. Yeah, we're here at CES. We just got in. It's the largest tech show in the world. They're expecting 180,000 people to walk through these halls this week, with over 3 million square feet of tech exhibitions, all of which are hoping to make the world a better place. And what we're looking forward to this week are more autonomous cars, drones, foldable display screens, 8K TVs, and the biggest game changer will be 5G, which is the first major evolution in wireless infrastructure in nearly a decade, and how it'll be implemented into smart devices and given a practical use.
In so many I was taking a look online at some of the gadgets and gizmos, the toys that are on display. So many of them this year also seem to be consumer products that are connected to Wi-Fi, devices that you can control remotely. I imagine that there's a good bit of privacy concerns about that. Tell us about what people are talking about there in terms of privacy concerns.
Definitely. Definitely. Well, there's only 4 panels on the schedule, which is surprising, especially after 2018. Privacy is a major concern going into 2019, and especially with all these smart devices we're going to see this week, smart cars, homes, health tech, toys even for kids. All of this connectivity and data sharing is a major concern. So we are looking forward to see what's going to be talked about this week about privacy.
All right, Romina Puga in Las Vegas at the Consumer Electronics Show. Romina, thank you so much. Much more of Romina's reporting online, abcnews.com, and of course on the ABC News app. Well, if you live out west, it was an ugly weekend of weather. That big storm is now moving to the east. 2 more storms on the way. They have been pummeled out there in California and the Pacific Northwest. ABC meteorologist Ginger Z is here with the latest. Hey, Ginger.
Devin, thank you. Let's go ahead and start with the weather headlines out west, because it's been a ruckus weekend. If you live anywhere from Northern California through Washington State, the gusts of 60 to 70 miles per hour taken out power lines, just exploding there in the video that you see. But I wish that was the end of it. It's not. Of course, there was heavy rain. Some of the mudslides you saw in Malibu were just from nearly an inch in a half hour, so it was the pace. And then the trees coming into bathrooms. This is actually my cousin's place in Sacramento. They moved out there because they wanted to get away from Chicago winters, and this is what they get. So last thing she or anybody else out there wants to hear is that there's more on the way, and we have alerts up from Maine, Pennsylvania, New York, all the way back to the West Coast. This is for different storms, but let me go ahead and focus on the West, because that's where the big headlines are going to come out of again. It's actually that second storm that's going to come through on Tuesday, before the 3rd, of course. That Tuesday storm that's going to bring you inches of rain again. You could end up with up to 4 feet of snow by the time this whole thing is said and done in the Sierra. And then wind gusts again Tuesday night into Wednesday, even as far south as Central California, of up to 60 miles per hour. Eventually, this rain does end up getting to Southern California again later in the week, and we will be tracking it. And then that 3rd storm to come. A barrage of storms, really, Devin.
Yeah, Ginger, non-stop. It looks like a wet one. Thank you so much. Stay safe out there to everybody in the wet weather zone. Speaking of wet weather, looks like San Francisco, the Bay Area, are going to get drenched as fans are descending on the city now for the college football championship game tonight. The game is set. Number 1 Clemson versus the Alabama Crimson Tide. Our Paula Ferris caught up with some fans a little bit earlier this morning. Here's what she had to say. Hey, Paula.
Hey there, Devin. We're here at Levi's Stadium. Clemson and Alabama are playing for the national championship tonight. They're playing for this trophy, whose name will be on here at the end of the night is to be determined. We're here at Levi's Stadium. Surprisingly, there's going to be some seats available tonight, and that's because of the travel concerns. Levi's Stadium, just outside of San Francisco. It's more than 2,400 miles from these southern schools, so it is a big ask for these fan bases to travel so far. On top of that, you're thinking about hotel costs, you're thinking about airfare. But if you want to get into the stadium, we found seats for as little as $169. The face value for that ticket was $475, or if you want to sit in the end zone, how about $299? It's not going to be better than the seats that these cheerleaders and the mascots have, though, right, Big Al? And right, Cub and Tiger, they're going to have great seats. One thing we do know, even though Alabama is favored to win in this game, I'm sorry, I know Alabama's favored to win, Clemson, no offense here. We know that when these two teams play in the national championship, it's always a nail biter. The last 2 times they played, separated by 5 points and 4 points, and it went down to the wire. So even though the seats might not be filled, there's a lot of interest. A lot of people are going to be watching this game from home. Devin, you guys want to give us a little cheer to say goodbye? I think they're saying go Devin. Go Devin. Remember, the game is on ESPN, 8 o'clock Eastern. I'm going to go.
All right, well, thanks to Paula for that. Again, 8 o'clock Eastern Time, ESPN. And I did get it wrong, lest I get pummeled on social media. It is the #1 Alabama Crimson Tide playing the #2 Clemson Tigers tonight. ESPN, 8 p.m. Be there. I'll be watching. You can watch us later today, of course, 3:30 Eastern Time, right here on ABC News Live, the briefing room. That's where I'll have the whole political team down here in Washington. We'll break it down, the biggest headlines of the day. And, of course, you can catch David Muir and the rest of the ABC News team tonight, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, World News Prime here on ABC News Live. Be sure to download the ABC News app. If you don't have it, you can watch all of this there on your phone and, of course, get the latest headlines. I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington. This is The Debrief. Thanks for watching.